Hello, everybody. We are really pleased to welcome you for this second podcast for Europe and Central Europe. So today we'll speak about Ukraine and Silicon Valley, kind of contest between each others. And we are really glad to have today Dominique Piotet, who is the president of the community of the French Tech in Ukraine, in Kiev especially, who is also the CEO of Unit City. And myself, Romain Rebour, who is president of the French Tech in Poland, in Krakow. And I'm also VP managing Europe for Squad Gurus. And I have also my consulting company. But anyway, what is interesting today is about Ukraine compared to Silicon Valley. So, hello, Dominique. Are you okay?
Hi, guys. Hello, I'm good.
Good. Good. So let's start about our subject. We have around 30 minutes. So Dominique, you've been living in Silicon Valley for several years. You know very well the American ecosystem in this part of the world, and we'd like to understand your experience and what do you think between Silicon Valley and Ukraine. So let's talk about the tech sector, and maybe US is really considered as the most dynamic business ecosystem, and today we are seeing some instability, like social instability, political ones. We see that the elections are coming in 1 week actually, and Ukraine is also living some instability also with the war with Russia. So all this instability can affect the tech ecosystem in the both countries, in your opinion?
What's interesting to me is there is one specific type of people who don't like instabilities, and we need those people in tech. They are investors. I think for the tech community in general, well, we code. So that's what we like doing, whether we're in Silicon Valley or in Kiev. We love coding. So we do code. And actually in both places, we're really good at coding, both in Silicon Valley and in Ukraine, and they're good. For investors, I think it's a very different story. Because when you invest in tech company, you take a very high amount of risk. The chances for your investment to succeed is minimal. So you really need to invest in a lot of companies. You need to have a large portfolio, and so you don't like uncertainties that are not just linked to your business, but that are linked to other environments. So honestly, I don't think it's a really good moment for investors. For now, it's gonna be a good moment, especially if you want to raise a fund or if you want to imagine what's going to be the future. But I think in both places, it's not as good as it looks like. However, I do think it's worse right now in the US than it is in Ukraine. First, because yes, we say there is war in Ukraine, but in fact, nobody sees a war. It's a war with no war. Because it's a huge country. Ukraine is bigger than France, so it's a very big country, and Crimea is not anymore really part of Ukraine, and it's been and there's no fight. There's a dispute, but there's no fights. There's no combat. It's a little bit more tricky with the frontier with Donbass. Where there's still some fights, but it's pretty minimal. So you don't really feel the war. And when you're in Kiev, you're 800 kilometers from the war, and so really you don't feel it. It's like it exists in the newspaper. It doesn't exist in our reality. When you're in Silicon Valley, it's a different story. Companies have a hard time hiring because frontiers are basically closed for tech people. I mean, there's no visa anymore. It's really hard to get a visa. It's not impossible, but it's really hard. And then the coronavirus actually is doing a really tough job. I was in San Francisco this summer, and San Francisco is a dead city right now. And so how do you create companies when you cannot meet people, when you cannot do what Steve Jobs loved calling collision? People bump into each other into an event, and boom, they have an idea and they create a company. And I think that part, we still have it in Ukraine. It's non-existent right now in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. It will come back. But from what I hear, it will not come back before at least June 2021. And when I see that, I see an opportunity. I see an opportunity for tech companies in Ukraine. However, things don't compare. I mean, it's really apple and tomato juice. I mean, it's two different ecosystems. One, Ukraine is very, very young. It's a very beginning. In Kiev, we have 400 startups. It's not nothing. It's good. We have a few unicorns, Grammarly, Preply. So we have a good ecosystem, but it's still very, very early on. In Silicon Valley, you have a very mature early on, more than 40,000 startup, billions of dollars. So I don't think it's it can compare. However, I think I see opportunities in Ukraine right now for sure.
Okay, thanks. So if I need to sum up, like both countries have their own instability or subject of instability, and but right now there is COVID, which is common to the both countries. But at the end, Ukraine is less affected and can still do business if you compare to US. You were talking about talent that is hard to hire in US due to visa restrictions. Can we compare a bit the tech engineers in both countries? Because we know that in US they have like huge universities, Stanford, Princeton, Harvard, and all that. But we see so many companies starting some IT project in Ukraine, maybe because of cost, but for sure because of the capacity and the tech specialties of Ukraine. Can we make them comparable, these both engineers?
Yes. No, I think it's actually very interesting and it's complex. In terms of quality, yes, for sure. And it's also because knowledge is available. What you need to learn to become a good engineer is vastly available everywhere in the world. Because of everything is online, so knowledge is available. True knowledge, like practical knowledge, it's a different story because you need experience, and that's another story. But I see extremely good coding school, engineering school in Ukraine, and it's not new. It's something that started during the Soviet times and even before. Helicopter has been invented in Ukraine by Sikorsky, was Ukrainian, and so there's a love of tech in Ukraine, and it's not new. We have about 200,000 developers in Ukraine, and we have about 20,000 new developers coming on the market every year, which doesn't really compare to the US, but brings us up to speed pretty quickly. So honestly, I mean, I think we shouldn't be shy. I think what we're lacking is not the hard skill, is more the soft skills. And for example, if you want to have a product manager, then it's going to be more tricky to find someone really good in Ukraine because we don't have that mix of tech understanding and tech engineering and good business acumen. and this is something that you find way more easily in the US. The question of cost is also a good question because developers are not cheap anymore in Ukraine. Of course, they are cheaper than in Silicon Valley for sure, but they are not 10 times cheaper. They're going to be 2 to 3 times cheaper. So it's good, 3 times cheaper, but it's not. It's you don't come to Ukraine because it's cheaper. You come to Ukraine because you need a good tech talent, and you will find them here.
Okay, yeah, interesting. We are in I am in Krakow, and we have quite similarities in this kind of challenges. But if I can say, by working with Ukrainian developers, in my experience, all of them, they are hungry to jump on very challenging projects. So they are not scared to learn and to go to this level of American engineers with practice usually. So maybe another question. We were discussing previously about Silicon Valley, that is not anymore an El Dorado, like we say. It's we have an image of Silicon Valley, maybe a bright one, maybe not the true one. As you were living there and now you're living in Ukraine, can we say that in Silicon Valley we have kind of lifestyle which is really higher quality than in Ukraine, or not?
Oh, no, definitely not. So I did spend 17 years in Silicon Valley, so quite a long time, and I still call San Francisco home. I mean, I still have a house there. I'm an LP in a fund. I'm invested in 52 startups. So it's an amazing ecosystem. Look, I think it's the best in the world for tech, and it will be the best in the world for a very long period of time. The quality of life is amazing if you have money. As long as you have money, and a lot of money, you're fine. But access to healthcare is complicated and extremely expensive. There's no real unemployment. Retirement is complicated. Cost of living is crazy expensive. It's crazy expensive to the point where it's not very rational today to stay in Silicon Valley. Life in Ukraine is extremely good. You just have to be okay with 4 seasons, including a cold one, which is not something we have in Silicon Valley, where we have only 1 season. Well, I mean, we have 1.5 seasons. So it's a very different weather. But actually, I'm very surprised by the quality of life and the fact that life is so much cheaper. Now we live in a period of crisis, so we can't travel as easily. But if we could, traveling from Ukraine is super easy, as it is traveling from Silicon Valley. So basically, I mean, to me, right now, if I had to choose, I would choose Kiev over San Francisco. I mean, in a minute. If I knew that I could jump on a plane and go to San Francisco for a week or two, because after a quarter I miss it, and I miss it much. So
very interesting. Actually, it brings me a point for the people who are starting a startup. In Kiev, it's possible. I mean, you can afford to work on your own project because of the low, like not so expensive way of living. But if you are in Silicon Valley and you start to work and you just start to invest in your own idea, it may be very difficult. You need to success in very short time, I guess.
Yeah, that's. So there's two things. There's 2 aspects to this. The first one that you mentioned, that is for sure. I mean, you can create a startup here in Ukraine for cheap, and with raising minimum money, you can. I mean, the burn rate is really low here, so you can you have a long runway. You can hire people. You can create a team. There's still a lot of uncertainties on how you create a company here. So usually, basically, you have your team here, but in fact, your company is in Cyprus or in Delaware. It's still a little bit of a problem. But anyway, apart from that, yes. However, what you're going to miss is what Silicon Valley is amazing for is network, and this is something you can't duplicate. In Silicon Valley, you go to a cafe, you meet three VCs, you pitch all the time, and if you're good and your product is good and you have a good team, you will raise money. Here, if your product is good, if you have a great team, you will raise no money because there's mostly no money. And you will bump into nobody in a cafe because there's literally 5 tech funds in Kiev. So this is kind of the issue we have here is we have an amazing ecosystem, mostly undiscovered, mostly secret. And so we don't have the network and we don't have access to the funding, which is a huge problem because how do you go global? So yes, you can create a startup in Kiev and you can stay in a startup stage for a long time, for a very long time, for a very, 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 very long time until you slowly die because you've met nobody to give you money. And so what is better, to die quickly or to die slowly?
And that's a big question.
So access to the network is a big question, and I think this is one of the challenges. We have to bring more funds and more interest, international interest from abroad. I think this is something you guys in Poland are struggling, but less. The ecosystem is much stronger, is much more structured and much more visible. So people come and look at you and look at your startup, and you have access to that network much more easily than we do in Kiev. So we're still struggling with that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're pointing one question I wanted to ask about the funding. Do you have a lot of accelerators or like incubators in Ukraine? I mean, for sure, not like in Silicon Valley, but how do you raise money? I know that there is not a lot of money, but from which kind of facilitators you can pass?
So no, we do have a lot of acceleration program. We do have a lot of actually in Unit City alone. I have 8 acceleration program. 4 incubation, 4 acceleration program in Unit City, and it's once again it's just Unit City. It's big, but it's only the beginning. So we do have those. There is an interesting number that I always mention, and it's from the Ukrainian Venture Capital Association that surveys every year all the deals that are made in Ukraine around startup. There's been about $500 million invested in startup last year in Ukraine in 2019. $500 million is okay. It's not bad, and it's increasing and increasing. But what's very interesting is out of this money, 90% is coming directly from the US, and 10% come from the rest of the world, including Ukraine. So basically what we see is we have funds in Ukraine, but most of the money is really coming from the US, especially for the larger deals. As soon as you go to Series A and of course Series B, it's American money, for sure. Europeans have not discovered yet that they're really cool companies here. I mean, I was mentioning Grammarly and Preply and GitLab that are world-class, well-known, well-established companies. They are Ukrainian companies, nobody knows, but they've raised money in the US. And that's kind of what is happening. It's kind of the pattern. As soon as something kind of a little bit interesting, they go to the US.
Yeah, we have the same situation in Poland. Maybe not 90-10%, but I would say like 50% of the larger deal in startups, they are from US, definitely. You know, it's not the same. Poland is part of European Union, close to Germany, all that. So, you know, it's part of the European ecosystem. And but Ukraine, as you say, maybe still needs to be discovered by European.
Yeah. No, I think it's thing. I mean, honestly, it's what I say. It's you know, there's something people told me, but I heard that several times. In Ukraine, you cry when you arrive, and you cry when you live. And it's interesting. I mean, of course, you don't cry for the same reason, but it's still that. It's still, you're like, what, Ukraine? Why do we have to go to Ukraine? And in fact, it's an amazing place.
I agree. I agree. Let's jump on another subject. You know that US is creating like global leaders, which takes over kind of monopoly from like the early years. Do Ukrainian startups have this worldwide thinking from the beginning, from their creation? Because you know, in US, they have already a kind of internal market which is already useful for them, like they can target US from the beginning. But what about the world for Ukraine, because the internal market is not so mature?
Well, the internal market is mostly inexistent, or is fairly small and pretty new. However, we have in banking very interesting stuff. In e-commerce, we start to see a few interesting companies. But you're totally right. They should think completely global. It's interesting because the way I view Silicon Valley, it's a giant startup machine. In Silicon Valley, there's only startup, and the only thing you do in Silicon Valley is you build startup, and you build startup with one goal, is to build the startup that is going to conquer the world in whatever it does. So it's a machine to create a monopoly, which is actually very questionable right now. And I think it was a cool model in the time of Intel, in the time maybe of Apple and Microsoft. And even though at that point it started to be questionable, I think it's extremely questionable with Facebook and those type of companies. And so I think we're going to see also a different model emerging, which is, yes, we need to create global companies, but do we need to create monopolies? And so I think we will see another model, and I hope this model is going to be European, actually, not necessarily only from Ukraine, but European, where we're more open to competition, where we're more open to a few really interesting topics like privacy, for example, that are very sensitive topics, and I don't think the US care about that, and I'm sure China doesn't care about it, and I know those are the two models that are building the tech giant of the world. So yes, I think Ukrainian startups should think global and should be more global, but for what purpose? And is the purpose to conquer the world, or is the purpose to build great technologies that are going to be useful to people and for people to have a better life? Because at the end of the day, I believe that technology is here to help us have a better life, not a worse life. And not to become slave of technology, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really more my philosophy. That's also one of the reasons I'm not so in love with Silicon Valley right now. I mean, I was in love with Silicon Valley when I moved in 2004, where it was really cool. Like, Facebook didn't exist, Twitter was not even an idea, and there was that energy of, yeah, we're going to change the world, etc. Well, they've changed the world. That's done. But in what way? But I still believe that technology has the possibility to change the world, and I would like to see a European way of doing it. And I believe Ukraine, Poland, Belarus, Armenia. I mean, those amazing undiscovered places. Well, less for Poland, but for sure. I mean, now we know about Belarus and tech because it's in the news. But who knew? Right, that Belarus was such an amazing place for tech. Not a lot of people. But when they're going to come out, I hope it's going to be for a better tech.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Even if we can say a lot of bad things about European Union and all the policies and all that, we have this GDPR. We have different way of working together and building things together and allowing competition, as you say. So I agree. Let's hope that it can come from us. Let's try.
Yes.
And what about the entrepreneur spirit in Ukraine compared to LA or San Francisco?
Very young. Very young spirit. And when I say young, I say not very mature. It's the beginning. When you see younger tech people, most of them still dream to work for an outsourcing company, which is about 50% of the market still. And outsourcing is not. Outsourcing is good. It pays salary, but you're losing the value, right? The value goes to the client and goes abroad, and so there is not completely yet a culture of product companies, which is something we need to develop, which is linked to the fact that you don't have that culture of entrepreneurship. Look, Ukraine is still a very young country. As an independent country, and it's still a country that has been through a lot of crises. Like every 5 years, there is either a revolution or another revolution or another revolution or a crisis. So it's a bit complicated to be an entrepreneur in that type of environment, and there is not yet an entrepreneurial mindset and culture. It's also because the fact that soft skills are not super developed. Hard skills are very valued and very well developed, and soft skills not as much. And to be a good entrepreneur, you actually need both, but maybe a little bit more of the soft skills than the hard skills, even though and the bigger your company grows, the bigger the soft skills component becomes key. So we need to develop that. There is also something else, which is a spirit that idea that you become an entrepreneur because you want to make money, which is a wrong way of doing it. And each time I explain to people, if you want to make money, become a lawyer or a banker, because you're going to make money. Maybe not going to become Rockefeller super rich, but you're going to make money. But don't become an entrepreneur because you want to make money. No, it's the chances it's not going to work are way too high, and the risks are way too high. You become an entrepreneur because you want to have an impact, you want to invent something, you want to change the world, you're passionate about something. You need freedom. Like you cannot live without freedom. You cannot imagine the idea of having a boss or whatever reason you choose, and it's usually a mix of that. We don't have that yet in Ukraine. We have way too many people who view entrepreneurship as money making in a good or in a bad way, because we still have corruption, and this is still a huge topic in Ukraine, a tremendous topic in Ukraine, and so the image of the entrepreneur is not the one we have in the US, where the entrepreneur is the hero, and that we kind of start to have in Europe, a little bit more in France. Well, thanks to La French Tech, for example, La French Tech changed a lot for the image of the entrepreneur in France. I mean, when I grew up, when I graduated in 1993. I'm afraid you were not even born.
I was 2 years.
There you go. And I was 23. And I mean, becoming an entrepreneur was not even an option. It was, you either work for government, you work for a bank, or for consulting. So I did consulting and banking, both, see, before becoming an entrepreneur. But it was not cool. And now in France, it's cool. Well, we're not there yet in Ukraine. We're not there yet in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's cool, but it's still not enough. I mean, I'm wondering, in terms of crisis, how many of those entrepreneurs are going to be finding that it's cool to be an entrepreneur? I don't know. I think we have a lot.
Yeah. Even before the COVID crisis, it was risky. Now it's even more risky. We don't see so many startup creation or like trying to help them with mentoring before. In my case, it was much more. So we see concretely the impact. Maybe just to finish our conversation, what would you advise to an entrepreneur which is not from Ukraine or not from US? Let's say a French one, because we are both French. What would you advise? Would you advise to go directly to Silicon Valley or to go to Ukraine? Maybe it depends what they need, but what would you advise?
I think the job of an entrepreneur is to see the opportunity. And it's really hard because it's both guts, your gut feeling, and so your intuition, and your analysis of what's good for you. If you need to access the market, and if you need to access to big funding, I definitely would go to Silicon Valley. Like if what you need to build is a unicorn, and it's your ambition, and you want to go fast, and you want to access the market, and you want to raise a lot of money, I would go to Silicon Valley. If you need to develop a product, if what you want or your idea is, I need a lot of tech people, I need a lot of R&D, my product is heavy in tech, I would definitely come first to Ukraine to build my tech team, then probably go to Silicon Valley when I have something really impressive to build. So I think it really depends. I met an amazing guy here. Amazing. I think he's one of the best entrepreneurs I've ever met. And he's the founder of a company called Ajax. So Ajax. And it's a Ukrainian company doing business worldwide. And he told me, there's two types of startups. There's a smoothie startup and there's a product startup. The smoothie startup is, you take a lot of bullshit, you put it in the deck machine, you create an amazing deck, you raise a lot of money, you spend all your money in marketing, and you keep 10% for the product, and then you create a Silicon Valley company. And then there's a real startup, which means that you're going to go deep in the stuff, and you're going to build a great product, and it's going to take time, and it's going to be tough, and you're not going to be on stage on all the tech conference in the world like all the smoothie startup people do. But you're probably going to create a company that is going to last, and that is going to really build something. I don't know which one is good. I know which one I prefer, and I know which one I got tired of, because let me tell you, I met so many smoothie startups in Silicon Valley. It's like, Jesus Christ. I mean, just watch Silicon Valley, the show from HBO. Just watch the show. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Okay.
So that's what I would tell. Really depends on what you want to achieve. But if you want amazing tech people, come to Ukraine and then go global. I would definitely recommend that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. I mean, thanks for the advices. So, do you want to add anything because we reached 30 minutes?
The French Tech is amazing. No, I'm not. I'm not joking. I think actually we're very lucky to be French and to have that very interesting umbrella that brings all of us together around the world. And I think I mean, I saw the very beginning of La French Tech when I was in San Francisco, and when I see what we've been able to build as a community of people who are just giving their time and their passion, it's something I think that's important. It's not being passionate about tech. So go La French Tech. That's going to be my last.
I can't disagree. I can't disagree. Otherwise, we'll maybe never meet. You see. So thank you, Dominique. Thank you for your work, your advices, and your experience in US and in Ukraine. I think we need to discover Ukraine, as you said, as Europeans, to open our eyes about the opportunities which are there and how it's moving right now. So thank you again, and have a great day. Stay tuned for the next podcast from the French Tech Europe and Central Europe. And bye bye. Thanks, Dominique.
Bye. Bye.